Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please find your way to a seat so that the program may begin now. Ladies and gentlemen, please find an available seat at this time and silence any electronic devices. Thank you.
Good evening. They still talking. Should we hit them with a howdy? Howdy. You know, we're from Texas A&M community, so.
Woo! All right, good evening, and welcome to the 2018 Welcome and Presidential Address of the 43rd Annual ASHE Conference, Envisioning the Woke Academy, Past, Present, and Future. I'm Natasha Kroom, and this is Shayla Haynes-Davison, and we are your MCs for this evening. At this time, we'd like to invite Dr. D.L. Stewart, the 2018 ASHE Conference Program Chair, to the stage to offer the land acknowledgement.
We got things to do, go on. Good evening. In the spirit of the conference theme, Envisioning the Woke Academy, and one of its key tenets, history as a process of remembering, we begin first this evening by acknowledging that we have come for our meeting as uninvited guests on to adapt an Anishinaabe saying, the land to whom the Calusa people belong. As we gather during this 43rd meeting of the Association for the Study of Higher Education, we acknowledge and assert that the land upon which we are meeting is the original homeland of Indigenous peoples whose rich knowledge and lifeways are present and deeply connected to this land. We ask that you recognize the many Indigenous people who claim what is now Tampa, or in the Calusa language was Tanpa, and in the state that is now Florida, or in the Maskoki language, Kunfushki, as their territory. These communities include the Asuera, Ice, Alafe, Amakano, Amakapirus, Apalachi, Calusa, Caparaz, Chato, Chalucan, Chine, Kuchayeg, Guacat, Guaranguv, Hobe, Akafui, Jayeg, Jororo, Mayaka, Mayaimi, Matekumbe, Mikosuki, Mokama, Okali, Pakana, Pawokti, Pensacola, Pahoy, Patano, Saturiwa, Sawokli, Suruke, Takatakuru, Tequesta, Tomonga, Timakua, Tokobaga, Vizcaino, Yamasi, Ufera, Yi, and Yustaga. The Mikosuki and Seminole tribes are descendants of these groups and also represent Florida's two federally recognized tribes. This evening, ASHE also wants to acknowledge that this land has a particular connection to the history of forced removal of Indigenous peoples away from their homelands. Egmont Key, located off the coast near here, was a site of imprisonment of members of the Seminole Nation, and from which federal troops forced their relocation west to Oklahoma on foot in 1858, as another horrific episode in the Trail of Tears. Some of these Seminole Indians, led by Polly Parker, escaped the federal troops. Her escape was fundamental to the development of the modern Seminole Nation. We honor these people, their resistance, and their resilience. ASHE recognizes that we are guests in this territory, and with that understanding, we remember and revere the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this land on which we gather. As you engage with the conference in this place, we hope you will also acknowledge how Florida reflects an assemblage of historical legacies and Indigenous ways of knowing. In fact, outside this hotel, on the waterfront east of the hotel, there is actually several plaques that recognize some of that history. We encourage you to make the time to stop by, to learn, and to remember. We also encourage you to recognize and reflect upon the current experiences of Indigenous peoples and the role that Western educational research and practice has played in those experiences. As a result of settler colonialism, Indigenous peoples continue to struggle within educational systems. However, Indigenous peoples also continue to thrive and strive towards centering Indigenous knowledges and practice, culturally responsive and sustaining research and pedagogies. The purpose of engaging in this practice of acknowledging the land is to renew and reaffirm the connection of people to the land But this purpose is only partially realized without each of us also recognizing that we all have a relationship to the land and reflecting upon what it means to you, to me, to us as scholars in and of the academy. Personally, as a person of African descent, my own relationship to the land is fraught and contorted. I am 3 generations removed from those who labored as sharecroppers and 4 generations removed from the enslavement of Africans on these lands. Both of these conditions were born of settler colonialism's greed for conquest, profit, and bodies. And at the same time, I have been able to spend my own life in educational institutions as both a student and an employee. I must recognize that the academy as a whole is wrought and sustained as a settler colonial project. None of these institutions, none of our institutions would exist without the genocidal murder, forced removal, and attempted erasure of this land's indigenous peoples. Finally, we are going to observe a moment of silence during which we invite you to take this time to start thinking about what your own relationship to the land is and how you have and continue to benefit from settler colonial systems and structures. Through this ongoing reflection, we make possible opportunities to strengthen our relationships across groups and amongst ourselves. Thank you.
We'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the program committee who has worked to actualize the conference theme. Will those who served on the program committee please stand and, if able, be acknowledged? We'd also like to recognize the ASHE office staff. Please stand if able to be acknowledged. We'd also like to recognize all the volunteers for this year's conference. Please stand to be acknowledged.
Okay, just one person? You want me to step back?
Lastly, we'd also like to recognize our guests who have come to support my soror president, Patton Davis, this evening, the members of the Tampa Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. Please stand. Yes, and the ASHE sorors who have worked so hard. All right, ASHE sorors, all right.
Listen.
Stalin. We thought that would wake y'all up.
Good evening, everyone. Are we in formation?
Yes.
Are you sure? Okay. If not, I believe our ASHE president, Dr. Lori Patton Davis, is here to help us do so through envisioning the Woke Academy. As I said earlier, my name is Natasha Kroom, and I'm an assistant professor of higher education at Clemson University. Lori was my doctoral advisor and dissertation chair and much, much more. But she is otherwise known in my heart as Big Sister. What you about to do?
Hello again, everybody. My name is Chayla Haynes Davison. I'm an assistant professor of higher education at Texas A&M University in College Station. And Dr. Patton Davis has been a friend-tour of mine for several years, but I'd like to use the words of two esteemed Black women scholars who have impacted my life. I think about them all the time, Dr. Sharon Fries-Britt and Bridget Turner Kelly. And so when I think about Dr. Patton Davis, we have been retaining each other for more than 20 years.
So here's what we all likely know. Dr. Patton Davis is professor of higher education at IUPUI.
She is a leading scholar on campus cultural centers, completing the first ever dissertation related to them and subsequent widely cited works. She is co-author of the newest editions of The Green Book, Student Development in College, Theory, Research, and Practice. Dr. Patton Davis is leading the charge on centering the experiences of Black women and analyses of higher education policies, practices, co-editing and serving as special editor on several works, including Rutledge Critical Perspectives on Black Women in College, NASPA's Journal About Women in Higher Education special issue, which we co-edited, on centering the diverse experiences of Black women in undergraduate in higher education. Also, the Journal of Negro Education special issue, Why We Can't Wait, re-examining the opportunities and challenges for Black women and girls in education.
As a critical scholar, Dr. Patton has been instrumental in centering critical race theory in her scholarship and has mentored numerous emerging critical scholars. She is mother to Preston and Parker and wife to Mr. Tobias Davis. But let's be clear, what you may not know is how the Patton administration has already gotten us into formation with this presidency and slate of programming. Through her vision and foresight, she is the first ASHE president to create a cohesive year-long program meant to connect the ASHE community beyond this annual conference.
I can do these two if you want. Okay. So, show of hands, how many of you have participated in the 7 ASHE conferences before our convening here in Tampa? The first being Woke Research Methodologies, the series, right? Raise your hand, which was designed to engage with critical scholars within and beyond the field of higher education who gave us their perspective on wokeness and their approaches to engaging in transformative anti-oppressive inquiry. So show of hands, again, how many folks in this room participated in the Institute for Community Engaged Research, right? A professional development opportunity meant to support ASHE members' development and execution of critical community engaged research methodologies to serve our communities in pursuit of post-secondary education.
She also envisioned yesterday's HBCU Day, an opportunity for local high school students to learn more about the history of historically Black colleges and universities and hear from HBCU grads and staff about their experiences on their respective campuses. This morning, the first ever ASHE Town Hall meeting was held in the local community focused on college attainment for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls of color. She coordinated the efforts for the Remember 1968, an exhibit on society, higher education, and activism, traveling interactive exhibit, which is here and can be viewed.
Yes.
And much of this was sponsored by a grant from the Lumina Foundation, which Dr. Patton was able to secure for
Yes.
all of these efforts.
Yes, yes.
And she might have threw in 25 of her own dollars,
Yes.
too. She dreams it, she works hard, and grinds till she
Yes.
owns it. And sometimes she goes off.
Which we know.
Please help
us.
Welcome to the stage.
Yes, for the 2018 ASHE Presidential Address, Dr. Lori Patton Davis.
Dice is on the beat.
Now it is.
Thank you so much for being here for ASHE 2018. I want to begin my comments first by acknowledging a few folks. First of all, Chayla and Natasha, I love you very much. Thank you for a wonderful introduction. I would like to thank the ASHE office and staff who have just been amazing, especially Dr. Kimberly Nails. We will miss her at the helm of our association. I want to thank the Lumina Foundation and the IUPUI Institute for Arts and Humanities, both of which were funders for many of the initiatives that Shayla and Natasha talked about. Thank you again to Dr. D.L. Stewart. Sorry. And the entire program committee, and to all of the generous sponsors, especially those who got random emails from me, even if you haven't met me, begging you to sponsor this conference. Thank you so much. I want to especially thank so many graduate students who were instrumental to implementing my vision. Berenice Sanchez, Elise Smith, and Wilson Okello, well, now Dr. Wilson Okello, were all presidential interns, but it wasn't just them. There was so many students who were instrumental, and so I'm very thankful to you. I don't see her in the audience, but I want to especially thank Dr. Ebony Zamani Gallagher and her colleagues at our Scholarship Matters for conceptualizing the shield that you've kind of seen everywhere. And to Dr. Charles Davis for creating the logo that, oh, it's gone. The logo, the main logo that you've seen on the cover of the program book. I'm thankful to the numerous volunteers who stepped up and planned events and made connections with community partners, those who called and texted to see how I was doing, to give me positive energy, and those that interviewed me for podcasts, just overall encouragement, and that positive energy really has been the driving force behind this conference. And I want to thank Dr. Sean Harper, my academic ride or die, as you all know. He and Dr. Estella Ben-Simone called me on the phone and bullied me into being nominated for a president. And even though I initially refused, I'm so glad that you encouraged me. And then last but not least, I want to thank my family who is here in the audience. My husband, the love of my life, as you all know on Facebook, my main squeeze. Tobias Davis, my mom sitting next to him, and then my two older sisters, Dr. Jody Jordan, who's also my soror, and my oldest sister, Debbie, who is by far the nicest person in the world. Maybe next to my mama, but Thank you all for being here and celebrating with me. And although they are not here, my 7-year-old son, Preston, and my 4-year-old daughter, Parker, are here with us in spirit, and I'm sure they're gonna see this somewhere on YouTube maybe, and that'll make Preston happy. He can tell people my mommy's on TV, which is what he likes to do, so this past year has presented numerous highs and lows related to leading an organization, and I just couldn't have done it without the help, support, and leadership of many of you in the room. This has been an amazing moment as the ASHE president, a moment I most certainly will never forget. The theme of this year's conference is Envisioning the Woke Academy. The word woke has been defined as having critical consciousness, an awareness of societal inequities, a willingness to act. It's a word heavily rooted in the ongoing struggle to make Black lives matter in society. But the word woke and the idea behind it was far too sophisticated to remain within the confines of a movement. And like most things curated, crafted, and generated by Black people, the word woke took on a life of its own. While the root of its meaning is still powerful, woke morphed into the idea that became unrecognizable for those committed to the struggle for liberation. Woke became pejorative. It became a punchline. It became something that people latched onto as evidence they were down for a cause, yet most were and still are unable to fully articulate. Woke became a way of claiming the image of the struggle without actually doing the work. So given this backdrop, I began to think about the theme of this conference and what I wanted to convey. And a million thoughts rushed through my mind. Will they get my vision? Will they understand my direction? Who'll take offense? Who simply won't get it? And for sure, there would be rumblings about the word woke, rumblings from two camps. One camp questioned the use of the word woke as if to suggest that the theme was just an attempt to colonize the word or jump on the proverbial bandwagon as a way to signify that ASHE was somehow woke. Another camp neither understood what woke meant, nor were they feeling the theme, because it just wasn't academic enough. What does that mean? How do we determine what's academic enough, I thought to myself. At any rate, the word woke simply didn't represent what ASHE was about and most certainly had nothing to do with the association's focus on higher education research. I found these critiques interesting, especially the latter. I'm not the first ASHE president to speak of this process of awakening. 25 years ago, Michael Nettles, the first Black president of ASHE, issued a wake-up call to ASHE, drawing attention to the emerging national policy agenda on higher education and assessment. And if you scroll through the ASHE website and examine prior presidential addresses and agendas, you will find that many of my predecessors were challenging our association and our members to wake up. Estella Ben-Simone pushed us to value practitioner knowledge and embrace equity-mindedness. Ivana Lincoln, who was honored for her contributions to qualitative research earlier today, 20 years ago as president, she explained that community, care, and love are qualities that we as scholars need even more so than research. Sean Harper, last year, wonderfully executed the theme, Power to the People. He pushed us to acknowledge, center, and situate power and ways of knowing with the communities whose voices should matter, but more often than not are silenced in our research, practices, and policies. My point here is simple. My agenda and my platform not only align with what my predecessors have done, but also honor and expand upon their ideas. The primary difference is the language through which I chose to express my agenda and the efforts I facilitated to materialize the spirit of the theme. As a researcher and scholar, I've learned the value of critique, the importance of placing ideas in the public sphere and dealing with scrutiny, especially when folks just don't get it. And so I think it's worth clarifying two things. First, the language of envisioning makes it obvious that neither the Academy nor ASHE as a collective is woke. But as president, I wanted to provide opportunities for us as a community to consider the possibilities. This conference and the theme wasn't just about envisioning a woke academy, but also envisioning a woke association, a thought I'll revisit shortly. Before we can even talk about a woke association, we first need to examine the context in which many of us are academic sleepwalking. We need to unpack the conditions that have created a culture of what I'll call zombification at our institutions and within our beloved association. So what's in the way? What is this idea around zombification? So to know me is to also know that I love good television. And so my husband Tobias and I are avid watchers and true fans of this show called The Walking Dead. And the premise revolves around survival. How does one survive and maintain a sense of humanity in a world overrun by the dead? Walking Dead will have you believe that zombies don't exist, that they're made for TV entertainment. In the show, the dead were once human, but were infected by a quick-spreading virus. The survivors in the show refer to the infected as walkers because they walk around preying on the living. Now, of course, the dead aren't really dead. Instead, they're zombies that still have some functioning in their brains, and that functioning tells them three things: to walk aimlessly, to be distracted by noise and spectacle, and to feed off the living. In the academy, this same type of zombification exists. In the book, Zombies of the Academy, the editors use the zombie metaphor to express unease and dissent about the state of higher education, where some of us are socialized to walk aimlessly, stay distracted by noise and spectacle, and feed off the living. For example, some research agendas are aimless and lack considerable focus. Zombie research isn't about making a difference in the world. The zombie research agenda lacks substance. It's not grounded in anything that moves the needle forward in higher ed research. Zombie research often feeds off of ideas, not to expand ideas, but instead to repackage them and to pass the ideas off as one's own. And we needn't divorce zombie research from the zombie researcher who isn't concerned with breathing life into future generations of scholars. Instead, graduate students are exploited for personal gain. The zombie researcher is entranced by the idea that somehow, some way, the academy will validate them as long as they do what they're told, as long as they uphold structures of dominance, and as long as they remain committed to the status quo, all while their research agendas say literally nothing at all. And so this is what I mean when I refer to zombification. There's a popular saying I often see on social media where someone might have read something and it moved them, and they might post on Facebook or Twitter, "This article just gave me life," or "This op-ed is giving me my whole life." In one sense, it feels great to learn that your work has held meaning for a reader. But zombification can set in at a moment's notice because you feel distracted by attention or the noise of compliments. The potential of scholarly celebrity, if you will, would force a person to avoid grappling with the fear of missing out. The process of zombification sets in when the sole purpose of your research agenda is self-promotion. So there was this tiny cafe in Indianapolis. Those of you who attend IU or from the area would know this. So I would go to this cafe and write on occasion, and it was called The Thirsty Scholar. And It reminds me a lot of zombification, the characteristic I mentioned before in terms of feeding off the living. And I think this notion of the thirsty scholar is an appropriate metaphor about engaging in research to be seen, people who feed off competition, working to have the most publications, grants, awards, speaking engagements, etc. And they do these things not because they're edifying, but because they thirst for an idea, the figment of something that doesn't really exist and won't necessarily benefit them. They are engaged in work that feeds the ego but not the soul, looking for validation in all the wrong places. Another iteration of this zombification is the microwave scholar, zombified by the process of rushing through research rather than devoting time and genuine energy. A person willing to plagiarize, copy, or hijack ideas and spaces, and in some cases steal whole identities, because they've been somehow socialized to believe that ethics shouldn't and for the most part don't matter. My point here is that at the heart of our work, there should be a desire to do better, to be better people, and not to simply write to serve ourselves, but to serve humanity and to do work that is about humanizing people and their experiences. So this idea about being woke or determining who's woke or not is too simple. It's more complicated than simply saying the academy is or isn't woke, or that as a scholar one is woke or not woke. Yet such dichotomies keep us zombified by the belief that things exist as finite categories that lack fluidity. We have to think more deeply about how we as academics and as scholars are situated in spaces and contexts that can simultaneously speak life and death. Even zombies have a level of complexity in which they are both dead and undead. So let's add a bit more complexity to how we understand zombification and how it operates in our beloved academy. For those on the tenure track, the phrase publish or perish should sound familiar. The phrase metaphorically suggests that your failure to publish will lead to an academic death, and that in order to survive, you need to participate in an unbalanced relationship with the academy. There's this Twitter handle called Shit Academics Say, right? And I found one post quite telling. The post said, "Except with minor revisions is a relationship goal." So, while we're trying to be booed up with the academy, we're missing an opportunity to expend our energy more meaningfully. You've got to know that the academy never has and never will love us. It wasn't meant for most of us in the room. For those of us who are still within the land of the living, the academy breeds dehumanization, zombification, and when you don't follow the arbitrary rules of the academy, rejection. Isn't it interesting that a person's scholarship doesn't matter unless it's in a journal with a high impact factor? Forget about the fact that the research could very well have impact on communities and in terms of informing policy and practice, but its impact is diminished because it's not in the top or the good journals. Isn't it interesting that among teaching, research, and service, service is the most devalued? So think about that for a second. The one activity that breathes life into people, that contributes to institutions and communities, that keeps us focused and engaged, that prevents us from working in isolation, and that is grounded in giving back and paying forward is so highly devalued. How complex is that? What about those who pushed back and resisted academic zombification? There are plenty of people who stay but refuse to conform, and others who leave academia altogether. Either way, these individuals are treated as outcasts, in some instances, or like failures. Altogether, they are dead to the academy because they pushed back or simply chose a different route. As colleagues, scholars within and beyond the academy, as people, part of being woke is developing a critical consciousness about the realities of academia. That is, if we aren't careful and thoughtful about the work we're supposed to do, we not only become subjected to zombification, but we can easily succumb to it. So zombification also occurs through methodological misunderstandings and unfounded philosophical assumptions about rigor and quality in research. Now, I think all research has the capacity to offer rich insights and lead us to asking more urgent questions. Although my research is rooted in qualitative approaches, I fully recognize and respect the value of quantitative research. However, in the same breath, I can critique research methods and methodologies. My critique My critique isn't against qualitative research. My critique is against the unfounded claim and imperialistic ideologies that quantitative research is somehow more rigorous, that it is unbiased and objective. This myth is also the springboard for critiques that qualitative research is less meaningful, that it's a bunch of stories gathered through conducting interviews, that it's me-search. And this kind of discourse is not only elitist, but steeped in the same ideologies that have folks in ASHE engaged in the academic sleepwalking I mentioned. Regardless of the research approach, questions don't just fall from the sky. They come from an experience or an event that somehow struck you as important and worthy of study. There's a value embedded in why we choose to study some subjects and why we avoid other topics. What we choose to ask, the manner in which we craft an instrument, the populations whose voices are either illuminated or silenced in the findings, the ways we make sense of outliers or non-representative cases, all of it is guided by the researcher's sense-making. Sometimes we need research that gives us information across large groups and populations and affords us a landscape view, and sometimes we need research that gets at the particular. Because when we lose the particular, people fall through the cracks. They get left behind and ultimately erased. This is why I wanted to see the woke research methodologies occur. Everyone wants to do important work and wants their research to make a difference, but I wanted us as an association to consider how do we do this work in a way that poses and responds to critical questions. These are the kinds of research questions I hope and that actually appear in this year's program book. This is why the Institute on Community Engaged Research was important. I wanted to provide a professional development opportunity steeped in serving communities and connecting with communities and being led by communities as we conduct higher ed research. Now, my desire to do this did not come without haters. So, there's plenty of hating to go around. I actually thought about starting a blog as part of my ASHE presidency. But I decided against it since my fragile white colleague, Steve Porter, has that front covered. You know, he and I were faculty at Iowa State back in the day, so I'm not sure why he came for me or this thing when I didn't send for him. But hey, his assertion was actually helpful. It was a helpful example in making the points in this talk. So, I took his blog post as a personal affront, but more importantly, as an affront to the work that so many of us in the room have been involved in to enhance the ASHE conference and bring people in rather than foster a sense of alienation. In the post, Porter attempts to quantify the number of sessions in the program that focused on quantitative methods, offering that logistic regression appears 4 times and quantitative appears 19 times and propensity score appears 6 times. While doing so, he reduces qualitative research to a broad stroke, suggesting it's one-dimensional. He or the colleague to which he refers provides a count of how many times certain concepts appear in the program book, such as social justice, white supremacy, critical race, diversity, consciousness, none of which are concepts inherently connected to qualitative research. But I mean, let me just say that these terms would certainly pique my interest, but not because I'm a qualitative researcher, instead because I'm committed to woke research. So herein lies the tragedy of his post, in that he detaches quantitative research from the critical stance of which it is more capable. So there are quantitative researchers in this room and in our association who absolutely use critically conscious lens and who study diversity, oppression, and privilege. But Porter's blog is too incredibly flawed to acknowledge this. A quantitative rationale is often used to dismiss the type of scholarship that I'm promoting through the theme, and also undermines the possibility and production of woke research through quantitative frames. Porter concludes that he's smarter than ASHE attendees, that there's nothing new for him to learn, and that he no longer attends ASHE. So, why'd he go and say that? How mighty white of you for asserting a stance of intellectual superiority. Upon reading the blog, my first response was, boy, bye. So this ASHE is about community asking critical questions and scholar awakenings. And it's unfortunate for him. I wanted to let this go. But the woke woman in me wouldn't let me sleep on this foolishness. So, want to talk about jokes? I got a whole bunch of jokes. What's the difference between me and Steve Porter? As a black woman, I have to think before I speak, and an ASHE presidency. What do you call it when a white cishet man, full professor, says what he wants to say without consideration of other people in the world? Monday. What do you call a white male quant scholar who uses his blog to attack colleagues? Probability mad. What do you call a group of scholars who think quantitative research is somehow superior to qualitative research? The control group. What do you call a quant scholar who relies on insulting qualitative research to gain attention? Dependent variable. And finally, what does a quant scholar who lacks confidence need? External validity. To clarify, my response really isn't about Steve Porter per se, but instead about what feels to me like a culture of people who want their association back and who have an unwarranted fear that qualitative research is taking over. More importantly, qualitative research conducted by scholars of color is a threat to research and the viability of this association. I said it before, and I'll say it again. There's room for multiple forms of research, regardless of methodological approach. We can have a space where quantitative research and qualitative research exist and inform and complement one another, despite differing philosophical assumptions and underpinnings. Dr. Kakali Bhattacharya, which was one of the speakers for the Woke Research Methodology series, recently posted a tweet that said, if we really want to do CRT work or any critical work, then we cannot render methodology innocent. We have to create new approaches to inquiry instead of assuming somehow methodology has remained untouched of oppressive structures. That said, I want to encourage you all as my colleagues to think about the extent to which the research you do disrupts inequities, names inequities, or results in findings that can inform oppressive and violent policies and practices that, when implemented, actually harm people. You ought not feel compelled to go through a conference program book to find out how many sessions are qualitative or quantitative. Instead, spend your time focusing on your work and how it complicates the power dynamics that shape academic and public life. Spending time in this type of deep reflection can be powerful and prevent us from yielding to the academic zombies that crowd our mental space on a daily basis. I want to make another point as it relates to zombification in the academy and the scourge of imperialism that runs rampant in higher ed research. So, one of the ways we prove our worthiness and make others matter is through our citation practices. And I wholeheartedly believe representation matters in higher ed research, particularly in who we choose to cite and who we fail to cite. And we rely on citation practices as a form of evidence to not only support our assertions, but to give credit to those whose work has informed our own. Embedded in this politics of citation are these inextricable histories from which it becomes difficult to separate. For example, how does one offer critique of a racist text like Herrnstein and Murray's The Bell Curve, in which the authors argue that Black people have low IQs, without citing the actual authors and crediting them with such a ridiculous idea in the first place? My sense is that we've been zombified in such a way that we believe citation practices should occur in one way. Legal scholar and critical race theorist Richard Delgado draws attention to what he calls imperial scholarship. In his own story, he noted, and I quote, "When I began teaching law in the mid-1970s, I was told by a number of well-meaning senior colleagues to play things straight in my scholarship, to establish a reputation as a scholar in some mainstream legal area, and not to get too caught up in civil rights or other ethnic subjects. Being young, impressionable, and anxious to succeed, I took their advice to heart, and for the first 6 years of my career, produced a steady stream of articles, book reviews, and the like, impeccably traditional in substance and form. Upon gaining tenure and digging deeper into civil rights law, he noticed a troubling trend. That is, he noticed that a small cadre of white men's voices dominated the civil rights scholarship, and they repeatedly cited each other, to the exclusion of racially minoritized scholars who were writing in the same area. Delgado's argument was that by excluding these scholars, the literature was skewed and incomplete. He attributed 3 factors to the phenomenon of citation practices. 1, the mistaken belief that minority authors who write about racial issues are not objective. The mainstream writers need to remain in control, thus ensuring that legal change does not occur too quickly. And the sense of personal satisfaction resulting from being at the forefront of a powerful social movement. Now, 10 years later, Delgado made similar arguments, noting that while there had been an increase in legal scholarship by scholars of color, and he termed their work outsider scholarship, those with more mainstream status continued to execute mechanisms to control the discourse for as long as possible. And when faced with the inevitability of scholars of color having a greater presence, the mainstream scholars resorted to several tactics. Some of those tactics included abandoning the field and choosing other areas of study. Some stayed but continued to ignore the scholarship of scholars of color, never citing their work. Some stayed and acknowledged the work, but treated it as an afterthought. So in this way, it would at least appear that the mainstream scholar knew the work, but didn't take the time to actually engage with it. Others stayed, acknowledged the work, and cited it, motivated only by the need to appear hip or relevant. Some cited the scholars of color, but did so in an effort to tame their more radical perspectives. And still, there were others who engaged with arguments and content of the work from scholars of color in a substantive way, offering both validations and critique. Each time I read Delgado's work, I'm reminded that his points are not only salient for the legal field, but also for the field of higher education, where we treat citation practices as if they're devoid of consequences or somehow neutral. But there's power embedded in our practices, and those practices are easily susceptible to power struggles rooted in zombification. In Gentlemanly Orthodoxy, Critical Race Feminism, Whiteness Theory, and the APA Manual, Audrey Thompson beautifully argues the following: priding itself on the clarity and impartiality of the writing style it endorses, the APA Manual seeks to promote universal access to scientific knowledge. Yet the very guidelines intended to ensure unbiased presentation serve to suppress alternative and oppositional constructions of knowledge. Rarely examined or challenged, APA orthodoxy encodes a particular epistemic tradition as a colorblind, genderblind, one-size-fits-all formula for meaning-making. She goes further and names the APA Manual's investment in patriarchal whiteness, as well as the peer review process of most journals, and the fact that the traditions that structure scholarship and knowledge production are powerfully coercive, especially for scholars whose work explicitly challenges structural orthodoxy in academic writing. This conundrum is precisely how we as scholars practice exclusion and ultimately contribute to the erasure of any knowledge or scholarship that doesn't neatly align with the predetermined structure of academic writing. As a Black woman scholar, I've seen firsthand the erasure processes and particularly writing about it. For example, Dr. Jessica Harris and I recently completed a piece where we discussed the value of intersectionality, but also trouble the ways in which higher ed research has done and undone intersectionality scholarship. We learned the ways people undo intersectionality, which included treating it as a buzzword or fashionable, so lacking any substance or explanation, decontextualizing it by not connecting it to a power analysis, creating other terms or concepts that borrow from intersectionality but don't credit women of color writers, using the term but erasing its history or mis-explaining it as a cross between identity politics and oppression Olympics. The studies we examine all follow similar research structures in which the authors attempt to substantiate their claims with evidence. The notion of evidence is important, but the discourse surrounding it is laced with assumptions about what counts as evidence and whose voices can be used to either make or substantiate claims. When the subtext regarding evidence emerges, Black women's voices are not treated as credible, hence the failure to cite them. Moreover, when Black women offer language or perspectives that effectively illuminate issues about which little knowledge has been generated, their ideas are either co-opted or altogether erased. So rather than citing Black women's work or citing the work of Latina scholars or Indigenous women scholars, writers more willingly cite other people, white women, but either way, they rely on a depoliticized version of a similar concept. Overall, Black women are erased as a result of research socialization processes that only regard certain people as experts worthy of credibility and subsequently worthy of citation. This study is just one study of numerous instances when Black women's intellectual labor is exploited and discredited. And my point is that academic writing and citation practices are not simply about who we cite, but who we don't cite and the reasons why we don't cite them. I appreciate colleagues working to push the boundaries of citation and academic writing, such as Dr. Eve Tuck, who gave the keynote at the Institution for Community Engaged Research. She advises scholars to, quote, consider what you might want to change about your academic citation practices. Who do you choose to link and recirculate in your work? Who gets erased? Who should you stop citing? I also fully support the efforts of the Cite a Sister founders. For calling attention to the ways that Black women's intellectual contributions have been ignored and challenging us all to do better. I've also begun to recognize the power of pushing the envelope in terms of what is considered scholarship. For example, how might we situate Beyonce Knowles as a producer of performative scholarship that has implications for higher ed research and is worthy of citation? When I think about the literature on pay equity in the academy, Beyonce sums up what Black women and women of color broadly have been saying for centuries. Give me my check, put some respect on my check, or pay me in equity, or watch me reverse out the debt. Or what meanings can we derive from Beyonce's Coachella performance, in which she was the first Black woman headliner, and she masterfully used her platform to pay tribute to historically Black colleges and universities? Her mother, Tina Lawson, posted on Instagram. I hope y'all realize a lot of my citations are from social media. Y'all get it? Okay. Her mother, Tina Lawson, posted on Instagram, I told Beyonce that I was afraid that the predominantly white audience at Coachella would be confused by all of the Black culture and Black college culture because it was something that they might not get. Her brave response to me made me feel a bit selfish and ashamed. She said, I have worked very hard to get to the point where I have a true voice, and at this point in my life and my career, I have a responsibility to do what's best for the world and not what is most popular. So many may see Beyonce simply as an entertainer, but her path was and is similar to many in the room who may begin our faculty careers playing by the rules, but experience an awakening in which we use our platforms to re-envision the rules. Beyonce did it. My mother did it as the first Black charge nurse in a long-term care hospital, the Veterans Administration Hospital in St. Louis. My aunt did it as the first Black woman postmaster in the city of St. Louis. And I'm doing it as the first Black woman president of ASHE. So, it's interesting to me, Black women are amazing, yet we just aren't seen as possibility models. And this is an argument that Chayla Haynes and I make in a forthcoming Teachers College Record article. So for sure, Black women represent possibilities for young Black girls, but rarely does this translate across societal contexts. Moreover, it's too easy to thrive off the contributions of Black women and dispose of them without accounting for the consequences. The phenomenon of misrecognition is one way of making sense of this looming invisibility. So Thomas, DeVito, and West refer to Black women as lost in the categorical shuffle. And they explain that Black women are non-prototypical. So they conducted this study of speeded categorization tasks, and the participants were always slower to link Black women with their racial category and gender category. So in other words, categories associated with race were more readily associated with Black men, and categories associated with gender were more readily associated with white women. So such a predicament substantiated the researchers' intersectional invisibility hypothesis. It is instances such as these that allow zombification processes to creep in. Again, such processes are about deadening voices rather than illuminating them and centering them. Black women represent one, if not the most significant and powerful block of voters in our country. But within the political arena, our needs are never seen as a priority. Black women like Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, Shirley Chisholm, Michelle Obama, and so many others have a legacy of shifting narratives and boundaries, whether in academia or beyond. I'm excited about Dr. Brittany Cooper, the author of the book Eloquent Rage. And I'm even more excited about Patricia Williams, who goes by the Twitter handle Mad Law Professor. So we got rage and mad, right? So to me, never has the hashtag Trust Black Women been truer. Yet, as Deborah Harley explains, we are consistently situated as the maids of academe, a group that remains, as she says, overextended and undervalued. All of this talk about me being the first Black woman president of ASHE has certainly been a moment of celebration, but it's also prompted tensions in my thinking. It's difficult to celebrate with also complicating the culture that allowed it to take so long. My understanding is that Wynetta Lee was at least on the ballot with another woman of color to which she lost her bid for presidency. But I've often wondered, what exactly are we celebrating? What institutional memory do I have to draw from, and how have people who look like me been situated within that legacy? What I know for sure is that my being the first Black woman president of ASHE not only signifies a moment for this association, but also brings to light the work that lies ahead. So earlier I shared that the theme was not only about envisioning a woke academy, but also envisioning a woke association. And I believe that ASHE is on its way to a more woke future. Getting beyond zombification and the other barriers that promote academic sleepwalking, I encourage everyone in this room to reflect on their contributions as scholars and to consider what it might mean for us to collectively engage in research and scholarship as a revolutionary act. A few weeks ago, I had the wonderful opportunity to see Michelle Alexander on a panel. And one of the panelists, Frank Thomas, is a faculty member at the Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, and he had discussed his recent book titled, How to Preach a Dangerous Sermon. And I was inspired as I listened to him name white privilege, patriarchy, heteronormativity, classism, and overall systemic oppression as issues that serve the status quo. And it led me to think about our capacity as scholars to first consider the role of activism in our scholarship, but to also think about what it would mean to implement a dangerous research agenda. In other words, how do we implement research agendas for higher education that are predicated on questions such as who's endangered and who's liberated? How might we disrupt the norm by being purposefully transdisciplinary and cultivating woke scholarship? What risks might we be willing to take that sets our association apart from how it's been understood in the past? And how might these risks position us to go in more critical and innovative directions? How might we collectively take advantage of the tumultuous societal context of violence, conflict, and outright acts of erasure in which we're situated? We often talk about higher education as a microcosm of society, but we could also argue that ASHE mimics the higher education entities that we study. What's clear to me is that we are in the midst of a moment, and with so much potential for ASHE and our membership. I want to see the energy and enthusiasm that you brought to this conference with you to continue on. Following ASHE 2017, my very best sister, friend, and confidant, Chayla, posted the following Facebook post. And it said, Professor Sean Harper set the table. Professor Lori Patton Davis will surely leave us full. And we've accomplished so much in a short year to materialize the theme envisioning the woke academy and to get you woke and full. Shayla and Natasha talked about several of those initiatives. There is information, an additional initiative that we just came up with related to the exhibit, a fireside chat with scholars about 1968, the ASHE Night Report series that you'll see shortly. And so that's a lot in 9 months, but efforts that were all well worth it and have the potential for modeling how we conference and how we realize a theme and how we move forward as a more woke association. There is concern about whether or not this can realistically happen. Some have jokingly referred to Sean's and my presidential terms as the Obama years. And it's been wonderful to hear from colleagues across the country share with me how they felt heard and validated and inspired and seen in a conference space they deemed less than friendly in prior years. They have expressed excitement about the sessions in the program book and even difficulty choosing between which sessions to attend. More importantly, many have expressed to me their being inspired by the theme and the associated initiatives. And so I want this momentum to continue, yet I'm aware of those in this association that harbor a fear of change, while others are under the impression that it's always been this way. I envisioned a woke academy and I envisioned a woke association, visions that will require ongoing work. And it's up to you to determine whether you're academic sleepwalking to preserve the establishment or you're woke and committed to disrupting the establishment. My hope is that my leadership of ASHE has brought you closer to the latter. I want to close with a quote from the late Shirley Chisholm, who stated, "The next time a woman of whatever color or a dark-skinned person of whatever sex aspires to be president, the way should be a little smoother because I helped pave it." Thank you. Hit the wall.